Thanks for joining us, everybody. My name's Joanna from Call Scotland, and I'd like to introduce today Adam Waits from Smartbox. Adam's background is as a teacher and then as an assistive technology specialist. And he's been working in assistive technology for around 25 years and has worked for Smartbox since 2007, involved in assessment, training, advice and support to professionals, parents and individuals on AAC and access solutions. And today he's going to be talking about head trackers, which are often overlooked as an option to help people control their device. So we really look forward to hearing all about head trackers and learning from Adam's expertise today. So I'm just going to pass over to Adam. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks, Joe. That's great. Thanks, everyone. Hello, everyone. Thanks for that introduction. I'm going to share some slides in a moment, but the plan of the day for the next 25 minutes or so is to talk about 3 different types of head tracker and when you might use one over the other, and try and give you some tips and tricks along the way, because as Joe said, it's an often overlooked access method. People sometimes just don't visit as an option. So without further ado, I'll share my screen so we can get started.
Just as Adam's doing that, can I just say this is being recorded today, so if you don't want to appear on video, on the video afterwards, then turn your camera off and we'll have questions at the end after Adam's finished. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks. Thanks, Joe. Great. Okay. So let's get started. So I work at Smartbox, as Joe said. I'm head of assessment there. I spend a lot of my time working with some of the NHS specialist services in particular, but still have a passion for access technology and assistive technology, working in schools and with adults and in all sorts of different settings. We're going to look at 3 different types of head tracker or head mouse today. We'll have a think about the HeadMouse Nano, which has been around for some time now. And is based upon an infrared solution. We're going to look at a Quha Zono, which is a newer type of tracker. We're going to look at the Quha Zono 2, which is a wearable solution. So you wear it usually, but not always, on your head. Fairly light device that has to be charged. And then finally, we'll have a think about Smyle Mouse, which is a software-only solution that uses the webcam on your computer, and will work with almost every webcam out there. You just have to download the software, and then you have the option to let your head movement turn into mouse movement. And that's fundamentally what we're talking about today. We're thinking about the fact that a movement of the head can be converted into mouse movement, and then you can choose how the person who's using that motion is going to click. And typically, a click is going to happen either by using a button or a switch plugged into, in some way, the head mouse or into a computer via a switch interface or into a communication aid, or it's going to be used with typically a dwell to click. So you might be using dwell software where you hover over an item on the screen, and that might be used for curriculum access, computer control, or to support AAC, so alternative communication, okay, in software such as the grid. Now, in all of these, I'm going to talk about using all of these different solutions with grid, which is grid 3. But bear in mind that each of them can also be used with other applications. So if in school you're using software like Clicker, or you need to use PowerPoint or Word, or some other curriculum software, for example, then there are ways to make each of these head mice work in that way. Okay, so a really quick slide. I won't go through every last detail on here, but just a few quick things to think about. Firstly, some people will sometimes ask me, and Joe and I were chatting about this before we started, well, where do you start with these? What are the key differences? I like to think about the fact that the HeadMouse Nano, for example, which I have in my hand, and I will try and show to the camera. I'll show you an image of it in a second. Is plug and play. You need a Windows computer, but it can also be used on a Mac. Will just get plugged into your computer via USB lead, and immediately your mouse will start moving, providing, and this is the thing, you have to wear a little silver dot. So typically you wear a little silver dot, which gets provided with the head mouse, or you can get something like a baseball cap with a silver strip on it, front and back. I've seen that being used before. And typically the dot is placed on the bridge of the nose, just above the bridge of the nose, or wrapped around the frame of the glasses. The bridge of the glasses is a good way to do it because then you never lose the dot. And the camera, the sensors of the HeadMouse Nano will pick up that dot and therefore any movement that you make. So you've kind of got like a little sketch there of what it looks like. You've got a big optical window on the front. Here it is, sorry, I should say. And then you've got two lights to tell you whether it's tracking. Green says it's tracking and red says it can't track. Okay. Let's just go back again for a second. The next option we'll think about would be the Quha Zono, which is radio controlled, so it doesn't require infrared and line of sight as the Nano does. So one of the issues with Nano can be if you get too far away from the computer, if it's too bright an environment, for example, if you go outside, then that can be a problem and can start being a little bit flaky in its performance. Whereas the Quha Zono, none of those issues. It's radio, so there's no need to think about line of sight. You can work with it from further away. It can be quite nicely worked with a large screen or with a projected screen, for example. But you do have to wear something which is a bit more cumbersome at the side of the head, but it can also be mounted on a wrist, on a foot as well, which is nice flexibility. The other thing to say about that, there's a bit more you can do with the Quha Zono. The head mouse is literally plug and play, and then you use your computer's software solutions to, for example, adjust the speed of the cursor. Whereas with the Quha Zono, you can use the built-in computer settings, but there's a second layer that you can add, for example, to reduce tremor. So if you've got somewhere where you get you want to smooth the mouse cursor, you can add a tremor filter on a Quha Zono with its own software. Finally, the Smyle Mouse is simply software, so you don't have to wear anything. You need a computer with a webcam. You need to install a piece of software, and I think I usually say that is both its strength and its weakness. It means that you have to take some time to get to know how the software works. You have to understand some of the settings that are there. You have to have permissions to install the software, and that might be an issue in schools or if you're moving from place to place and wanting to use it on different computers. It is not simply a case of plugging it in as if you were plugging in a mouse and expecting it to work. There's a bit more to that. But once it's installed, and assuming all those things happen, it's very flexible and can do lots of interesting things about changing mouse speed, managing a tremor, locking onto or snapping into icons and objects on the screen and so on. Okay, let's take a closer look. So here's the HeadMouse Nano, which is an image of a HeadMouse Nano. I've mentioned the optical window and the LED on the front, the LED lights on the front to tell you it's tracking or not. Underneath, there are some very tiny, what we call dip switches, which I'll come to in a second. And then underneath, there's a USB port for it to allow you to connect it to a computer, but also a switch port. So I mentioned right at the beginning that typically HeadMouse can be used with a dwell or with a switch to click or with a button to click, and you can plug directly into the HeadMouse and just use it like an ordinary mouse click. So that could be someone clicking with a button in their hand or underneath a foot. Not so good to have, for example, a switch mounted next to the head, because the minute you start moving your head, you are affecting the way in which the head mouse is designed to work, and you're likely to reduce accuracy. So here's a blown up image of those tiny, 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 tiny little dip switches. They're called dip switches. They're little mechanical switches, and it's the only way in which you can alter the performance of the Nano. The key one I use is the first one where you just drop one of the 4 switches down and it doubles the speed of the HeadMouse Nano. Okay. I should probably say at this point that it's always, with all of these devices, it's good to know how to change the cursor speed in Windows. I'm on a Windows computer today, and so I'm just going to really quickly dip down to here are my Windows settings. I'm using Windows 10 today. I've gone to the Start menu and I've gone to Settings and I've found where it says Mouse. And here, all of these head mouse will be affected by how quickly you have the cursor speed. And also, I like, and you'll see on my screen, I've got quite a large cursor. I certainly, particularly when someone's just started, like to increase the size of the cursor and maybe change its color so that you can clearly see it on the screen. Other tips and tricks that you can use will be quite useful when you first start using a head mouse, as it would be if you were using a joystick or a trackball, would be to look at these additional mouse options and think about things like pointer trails. So you can come in, you're really diving quite deep now into pointer settings in Windows, but there are some options here around the visibility of the cursor on the screen. Okay, so these are things to find in Windows, and there are similar settings to be found if you're using a Mac. Okay, so all of those can be effective in terms of allowing someone to move across the screen. Fundamentally, what you need to be able to see someone using is not to work too hard to move from one side of the screen or from the top to the bottom of the screen. If they're having to work very hard and stretch their necks a long way, then we need to do something about perhaps speeding up the mouse cursor. But we have to get a compromise between speed and control. As we speed up a mouse cursor, it becomes a more raw experience and can become less smooth. So we have to think about, is there a tremor filter we could be using, for example? Just quickly, as I'm from Smartbox, we sell the grid pad, and there's one of the issues with the HeadMouse Nano, because it's a piece of hardware which sits on top of your computer. It comes with a little tripod stand to mount above a laptop, but many of the users I work with will be using a communication aid, and in which case we have a metal enclosure which is literally screwed to the top of the screen. And you can see that with this, a typical position for this head mouse, and there are a few others like it on the market, would be front and center at the top of the screen. And so there's a mounting point there for that particular device. Okay, so hopefully you can now see that I've moved over to my grid pad 15. Just press start to me, begging your pardon. So a couple of things now to think about would be any head mouse, whether I'm using a Nano or whether I'm using a Quha, is to think about some of the settings that you might be using. So whether I'm going to quickly think about going into grid for a second. So here I am in grid software. I'm thinking about an AS user. If I go into one of my users, whenever I want to start using a head mouse, the place to go is into settings and pointer. A head mouse, think of a head mouse like a mouse. It is a mouse. So we want to alter the way in which the mouse works. We want to think about, are we using a mouse click or are we using a dwell to activate? So if I use dwell to activate, I can choose how fast my dwell is. I can choose how the cell is highlighted as I move across it. So I'm going to make it a full orange cell as I move across it. And I've got quite a slow dwell here so that we can see it. But now,
sorry, Adam, excuse me. Sorry, Adam, to disturb you, but we can't see your screen at the moment with the grid.
Okay, thank you very much for letting me know. I will.
Okay. Yeah, I think you might be in presenter mode. We can see your presenter.
You are quite right. I am in presenter mode. Let's do that. And does that help?
Yes, that's it.
I'm so sorry. I'll just quickly do that again. So I was here, I'm in grid, I'm in settings, I'm in pointer, and I was just talking about whether you're using a click or a switch to select or a dwell to select. I've chosen dwell as quite a common access method with a head mouse. Here's my 2-second dwell, but you can alter that. And there's a way in which the cell is going to be highlighted as I move across it. So I'm not then having to, and I will be the first to admit in the moment I'm using a mouse, but you'll have to imagine this cursor here is being used with a head mouse, and you'll see that in a moment. If I now hover over one of my grid sets, I've gone into Supercore. you can see now that as I move across, nothing's been selected until I wait long enough and do a dwell. So what's really important here is that someone has to control to stay within the cell as they're selecting, and you don't want too much head movement, but you don't want it to be so sensitive that they're accidentally moving out of the cell all the time. The other important aspect for anyone using a head mouse with dwell, just like with eye gaze, and I would say the same if they're using a joystick with a dwell rather than a click, is that they need to have a way of pausing the mouse. So a rest cell is important too, and that will normally be available in Grid on most of these things. And if you're using other dwell clicking software like Dwell Clicker, which you can also get from the Smartbox website inexpensively, will have a rest function. Okay, let's just come out of that for a moment, and we'll get onto the Quha, and we'll get on to actually seeing that in action. So let's come back from the current slide. Okay, so hopefully you can now. And I will press pause, hopefully. There we go. Over to my grid. Okay, so the next head mouse I want to talk about is called the Quha Zono. I've got a blown up image of it there on the screen. I don't know if you can see it or not, but I'm just holding up to my webcam, and this is the Quha Zono mounted in a headband or in a head mounting kit, which is a bit like an Alice band. It gives it a little pocket to wear. The alternative is that it comes on a there's the head mouse kit on that image there. There's also the typical sort of sports band type affair, which comes with it. So you need to be able to clip it onto the side of the head, which I'm going to do now. And on the side there, you can see there's a button which you press to turn it on, and a USB port, which is how you would charge the device. So typically this is going to last probably for a good couple of days. The Quha Zono has got sort of about 60 hours of battery time. On the other end, and plugged into my computer, I've got the receiver. So it's a USB dongle that plugs into a USB port. And into that, at the moment, I've also plugged a switch. So there's a switch port on that. Okay, one important point about the Quha Zono, as with the Nano, is you can use it on multiple platforms. So worth bearing that in mind. Okay, so I'm going to put this on and turn it on. So when I turn it on, the light goes green and then it blinks occasionally just to tell me it's on. So again, when I'm using this now, you could probably tell I've mounted something. So if I just come out of Venter mode. Okay, so the first thing to say about any head mouse, here's me using my head mouse. I hope you can see the cursor moving on the screen. I'm just practicing how much head movement I have to do to reach across the screen. So I'm going to look at the screen. I'm looking at you all now as I'm moving around, and I might want to adjust those Windows settings to adjust all of those things. One important top tip for anyone using a head mouse is learning to use the edges of the screen to reposition the cursor. So if I move to the left-hand side and push against the right-hand side of the screen, when I come back to a neutral position, now my cursor has moved all the way over to the left. When I come back and now I push against the left-hand side, I can reposition the cursor so it's in a more comfortable position. I might do that a bit more, and you can see it's moved over. So I can use the edges of the screen to reposition. It also means I can crab across the screen if I'm struggling with too much head movement to get around the screen. Okay, so using and understanding the edges of the screen help you reposition the cursor is important whether you're using a Nano, a Quha, or something like Smyle, or another head mouse for that matter as well. That you sort of bounce off the edges of the screen. If I was to go back into my mouse options again on my computer and just reduce the cursor speed quite substantially, and then we'll try that again now. So I am now having to move my head quite a bit further to move around the screen, but I do feel like I've got a bit more control. But now I'm trying to get all the way up to the top of my webcam, I'm really struggling. So if I push down a little bit beyond the bottom of the screen and then come back up, oh, I can get up there now. So that's what I mean by bounce. Now, bouncing off the edge of the screen. The other thing to say here is I've got my switch. So now if I want to control this, I can choose to close this window, and I'd actually say I've got this cursor speed a bit too slow for my liking. Okay, so I want to close this window. What I like about HeadMouse is if you've got head control, you can really work quite nicely on here. And I can move, and I can really have got some very fine control if I want it. And that's something that I would really struggle to do in the same way with, for example, eye gaze, which might be typically what someone's thinking about when they're thinking about HeadMouse or eye gaze or switch or whatever. I've got very instant access. If I've got the ability to control a switch in either my hand or some other part of my body, a HeadMouse offers very flexible and very accurate use for someone using this. But it takes time to get used to as an access method. And the first time someone uses it, it can feel after 10 minutes, you can begin to go, oh, I've got a bit of a sore neck. What can I do? So just stick at it, give it a go. Okay. So let's come back to here. I'm being aware of time. Okay, so we've talked about that. One thing I just want to point out would be that there is a neat and interesting other way of selecting with the Quha, which is the Cento here, which is a puff switch. So it's a breath controlled puff switch. You can see the Quha mounted in the headband as I've been wearing it. And then the Cento is linked to that and is breath controlled. And I'll just turn off my head mouse for a moment while I'm doing that. Okay. But also notice there's an image there to show you that you can choose to wear it in another part of the body. So if I was to go to, if I come out of that for a second, if I come to here, the Quha software, which I don't have to install on my computer, I can just plug it in and go. But if I want to make some further changes to things like the speed, I can begin to do that. I can control the X and the Y axis. I can increase tremor. So all of those control issues, I was saying, well, I'm finding this a bit fast. I'm finding I could do it being a bit slower. I could also have come here. And for example, someone who finds it easier to move left to right, we can have that slower than someone moving in a vertical position. Notice I can change what the switch is going to do. And I can also, there's some other bits and pieces I can do too. A separate piece of software that comes with it allows you to choose how the Quha is mounted. Is it typically on the side of my head, or actually could I use this because it's gyroscopic? It's a radio controlled gyroscopic tilt mechanism. I could wear it with a Velcro band, which comes with it on the hand. I've seen it being used on the ankle as well, for example. Okay. The other thing to mention with Quha are there's some quite advanced gestures that you can use. Now, personally, I certainly wouldn't start with these. I think this is quite an advanced feature, but you can use head movement to do some of the things on the screen there. So you can use it to pause. I talked about using a rest cell in grid, but outside of grid, you might want to pause there by moving your cursor right, left, right, left. And by doing that, it would then pause. So I will just quickly show you a video very quickly. Cursor centered. There we go. Okay, just to give you an example there of how that works. Try and get off that slide if we possibly can. Okay, we've talked about the adjustable settings. If you are not needing to use grid or clicker, but you want to be able to use with all software and you don't have an ASE need, there is a Dwell piece of software that you could use on the Quha Dwell site, on the Quha site. I'm not going to talk about that today. I'll show you that today for lack of time. So another piece of Dwell software can be helpful. You can also, and I'd say if you're starting, particularly with a wee one or small one, I'd be thinking about using something like the Smartbox Dwell clicking software, which is available on the Smartbox website. It's simple, straightforward and inexpensive to use. And I would be looking at that before we do this. But for advanced features with a customizable toolbar that goes everywhere your cursor is, this is well worth downloading the trial and having a look at. Okay, finally, there is a new version of the Quha coming out, which is going to be really, really small and discreet. It's coming out this month, so very quickly.
Quha Zono X HeadMouse. Use your personal electronic device with your head movements precisely and easily. Zono X has wireless Bluetooth connection, slim and stylish design, easy magnetic attachment to a charging dock and wearing accessories.
Okay, I think we've seen a smaller, lighter Bluetooth, so you can use it with a phone or with a PC. So that's coming this month. Just a new version of what you've just seen there in the Quha. Finally, I said I'd quickly show you the Smyle Mouse. Remember, this is the software-only solution, very flexible, lots and lots of advanced options that you can cue into. It uses clever AI to pick up facial markers on the face. Please don't think you have to use a smile as an activation method. You can, but I've not seen many users in our spheres for whom that's going to be the right way to do a mouse click. You can use a dwell, you can use a switch, and you can integrate it with other AT software like Grid. Okay, but let's have a quick look at part of this video. I'm going to skip to the bit I wanted to show you, which is where it's being used for communication. Okay, now the weird crossing of hands that the guy demonstrating this, I think it's all to do with saying, hey, look, I really aren't using my hands to do any mouse clicks. So he's using Grid, he's using the dwell clicking options I showed you earlier, and the green lips and the green eyebrows are purely to show you it's picking those things up as facial markers. He's not wearing anything, he's no silver dot, he's not got anything on the side of his house, it's just using the webcam. Again, you can within software. I'm going to stop there and we're going to have some questions in a moment. So I'm going to stop showing my screen. I will just point out that where you can get it from. You can alter the X and Y axis. You can put tremor filters on. It can snap into objects on your screen, but you do need to be able to install software, and it is Windows only. But again, you can try it and see if you like it. Try it on your own computer at home. I would suggest if you're familiar with things like Grid, go to our website to download it, because there's a tweaked version of it so that it works better with Grid and avoids the push to use a Smyle to select, where I think more likely you're going to be wanting to use either a switch or a dwell for selection. And that, Joe and Robert, is me. I'm going to stop there and hand over to you for questions. I think I'll stop sharing my screen.
That's great, Adam. That's lots of information there for us to take in about those devices. Thank you, and great demos as well. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask to finish off? One thing that I was going to ask while anybody's thinking of a question, you can pop your mic on if you like, is, yeah, I mean, which one do you prefer? Is there anything that you would go for over another? Or
okay,
they've all got their
strengths and weaknesses. You knew I'd say that, and they do.
Yeah.
I think I look kind of in the way I presented them, which is the easiest one to start with is the Nano, but it's problems because it's plug and play, so it's likely to work well in the school. If you can plug a mouse into a computer at school, you can plug this in and it will work. It's a mouse. But you have to wear something, so you always have to have that silver dot with you. And there's if you're in a bright environment, you could have issues with reflections. because it's infrared. You can't use it outdoors very well. You've got a limit to how many changes and tweaks you can make to how it works. So that's probably for a limited, for a school setting where you've got lots of unfamiliar staff, perhaps, or you're just starting. That's a good starting point. But yeah, they all have their strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, yeah. Are there any opportunities to borrow them from?
Yeah, so Smartbox have a loan service. So it might be there's a couple of things you can either loan a device, or if you're I mean, again, in conjunction with you guys, I think, you know, Graham will often come out and support visits for people who are wanted to try assistive technology or need to look at AAC if required. So yeah, get in contact. Smartbox can help. You can point them to us. You've probably got a loan bank of things as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a way to do that. Yeah, and remember that at least one of those solutions I showed you there doesn't require anything to be borrowed. It's a 2-week trial that you can just download the software. So look for Smyle Mouse on our website, and that would at least get you to the point of understanding whether someone is likely to get the concept and have the control of using a head to control mouse movement. If you're working with someone who's young, you might want to think about what software you put on the screen, because you might want to think about something fun and interactive. Robert and I were chatting earlier about what we might use, and it's things like Inclusive Technologies Mouse Skills is a nice starting point for target practice and practicing things like clicking and dragging and that sort of thing.
Yeah, great. I think, Linda, you've got a question. Do you want to put your mic on?
Yep, I was actually just wondering, have you guys actually tried the new Zono X?
Yes.
Is there improvements, or is it purely size?
No, I think it's size, Linda.
Right.
So I think it's about it being more discreet. It's magnetic the way it clamps into your head. So be careful about things like, you know, you've got to think about things like cochlear implants. I think it's limited in terms of I have some concerns about it fits on an ear loop over the ear, like as if you were like a white van driver with a mobile phone. It's that sort of an affair. But I could also see that in some instances being knocked off. But it's a nice, neat solution in terms of it just clamps onto the side of that with a magnet, and you saw the magnetic charging dot. Performance-wise, very similar. Handy that you don't have to plug anything into the computer because it's Bluetooth. Handy that you've got the potential to move between your computer and a phone because it's multi-platform, just Bluetooth. It could connect up to whatever you're using. But again, a smaller battery life because it's Bluetooth and small, so I think probably about 12-hour battery life. But functionally, the same as the Quha Zono 2 in the way it works once you get it up and running.
So it's actually always been Nanos that I've used, or HeadMouse Extreme before that.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm thinking just the way that you're describing that might almost be a good idea, because I'm looking to extend my different HeadMouse options. Might almost be a good idea to buy quickly an old version.
I think for assessment,
and then buy a new one.
Yeah, I mean, I think for assessment, any of the Quhas will perform in the same way. It's about what you'll tolerate wearing.
Yep.
The Quha Zono 2 I showed you. The nice thing about it is you can wear it in lots of different places, and you can tell it on software where you're wearing it. The Quha X is more restricted in that you have to wear it on the right ear or on the band that I had. You know, this kind of an affair. And there's the Cento. You could use it like that too. They're doing a version for that, but it is a bit more limiting in that respect.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
But also try Smyle, because it's software, and it's. I've got some other specialist services in England are real fans of it. You get little clusters of people who like one thing or another.
I just looked at it again this afternoon with Graham, and I was going to get a license for it as well. No, that's great. Thank you. Really helpful.
I would say, importantly, because I've fallen foul of this, the Smartbox version is nicely tweaked for use with Grid. Makes it a bit easier to get started.
Right. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Any other questions before we finish up?
because we have overrun because I talk too much. But,
We could probably keep going for quite a while longer with some more questions in chat. But I think we are running out of time. Yep, there's a few thank yous coming up in the chat there. So yeah, thanks Adam. That was really informative and interesting. And of course, we can get in contact with you at Smartbox. Just go into your the main sort of contact page of Smartbox and get in contact with you that way.
Yeah.
Is it okay to share your email address?
Absolutely. Yeah, adam.waits@thinkSmartbox.com. Spelling was what you had on the front slide because everyone always misspells my surname, but no E and you'll be fine.
Right. That's great. I'm just going to pop that in just now. There we go. There's Adam's email address for more info.
Think my final thought is if you've got old HeadMouse in the cupboard, in the assessment kits, in your services, they probably still work. Use them. Functionally HeadMouse, think of HeadMouse Extreme work in exactly the same way as Nano. There've been some interesting innovations as webcams improve, but they'll still work and still be functional.
Great. Okay, right. Thanks, Adam, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Have a good evening and see you next time. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.